Good evening, everyone. We continue our study in the book of First Kings. Now, chapter 6 is a very interesting chapter because it describes to us the work that Solomon was doing to construct the temple. Now, as I had mentioned yesterday, what we are seeing is a snapshot, enough detail for us to construct an image in our mind as to how the temple might look like. But there are lots of details that is really left out. The reason why it is left out is because it is not for us to mimic or to rebuild or reconstruct the temple. And so people at that time, whatever David had communicated to Solomon, and all the things that they have communicated to all the workers, the patterns, the design, the imagery, what is written down for us in chapter 6 is just a glimpse of it, I would say, a glimpse of it. And it's enough for us to have a picture or a mental picture in our minds. Now, there are lots of things that I would say that I am also using what I call an artist impression, and the liberty for me to decide on how some of these things may look like. And so, even for yourself, when you read through the text, and we are going to see the Hebrew as well, that it is not meant for us to know all the details. Now, before we continue from verse 14, let me just recap and draw the picture right above. When we began, we were looking at the temple dimensions, as you can see here. 60 cubits in length, 20 cubits in width. The height was 30 cubits. I want you to remember 30 cubits because later on you find that it's not all 30 all the way through. So what we do see is we have this 20, this is like a square, and then 40, and you notice this is long. And with that, we actually have a porch in front, which is 10 by 20. And so this is what we have. And then we also discussed that there is a side chamber that is built on the side all the way around. And this would be the layout of the temple. Now, with the layout of the temple, we recall that the height is 30 cubits from here. And then we talk about the how should we say, the chambers at the side. We know that there is no way that the wall would be penetrated by the 3 floors of chamber. So I had tried to show you that we have the rocks that form the wall of the temple. And as it is formed, you find that the first layer, we have 3 layers. The first layer would have an offset. The second layer would have another offset. And the third layer, another offset. And with this, we can also see that the outer wall is also made of stones. And so with this, we can see this is the side profile, and at the top is also made of stone. And that's generally how it will appear like. And then there is a door on the right-hand side. And there is a stairway, and understood as a winding stairway. And thereby we would have the planks, and then the plank will be below and above. It's going to finish there. At the same time, we're also going to see that in the wall of the temple, it is also done the same way. So if I were to demonstrate to you, this would be the roof of the temple. This would be the side wall. Now, with the side wall, I think we need to also fill in the blanks of the fact that there is a window that we are supposed to insert. And the window is actually like this at the top. And in this case, we can show it this way at the top. And you notice that the outer side would be bigger than the inner side. And what we did was we finished off with verse 9 and 10, that there are planks of wood. The planks of wood would be the cedar planks. And this would be finishing off the sides of the walls. Now, it is important for us to realize that the finishing of the stones, the planks on the stones, is so that you would have a smooth surface for what we're going to cover later on. And so, with this, let us continue from verse 13. Yesterday, we left out at verse 13 to remind us that the construction of this temple is to show the presence of God amongst the sons of Israel, my people Israel. Today we continue in verse 14. And so Solomon built the house and finished it. He started and he finished. This is just a passing statement because of the what we call the interjection of how God came into the scene to remind Solomon of the purpose of the temple. In verse 15, then you say, he built the walls on the house in the inside with boards of cedar. From the floor to the ceiling, he paneled the walls inside with wood, and he paneled the floor with boards of cypress. What does that show? It means that with this, there is also the walls, right? And this would be on the inside with boards of cedar from floor to ceiling. And then on the ground, you find that these would be paneling of cypress. Verse 16. And then he also built 20 cubits on the rear part of the house with boards of cedar. From the floor to the ceiling, he built them on the inside as an inner sanctuary called the most holy place. Now, in the walls of the house, generally is referring to the front, but you notice that what this would now refer to is both the inside of the house and the rear part of the house, which is the sanctuary, the Holy of Holies. And that tells us that everywhere on the inside are boards of cedar and the floorboards of cypress. Verse 17, the house, that is the main room in the front, was 40 cubits long. We are talking about this part here, 40 cubits long. Verse 18, there was cedar inside the house carved of gourds and open flowers. Now, gourds would be knobs. Open flowers are just flowers, and everything was cedar, and there was no stone visible, basically telling us that the boards on the inside here are carvings. So they carve pictures onto the walls. Verse 19. And then the inner sanctuary inside the house, in order to place the ark of the covenant of the Lord. This is the inner sanctuary. By inner sanctuary, we are definitely talking about this portion here. This would be the inner sanctuary. And so this is the design of the temple. Verse 20. The inner sanctuary was 20 cubits in length, 20 cubits in width, 20 cubits in height. Now we have a height equals 20, which means that the height of the inner sanctuary is actually lower than the rest of the building. So this is 20, 20, and 20. And this would be 40 and 30. And so this part, the front part here, would be higher than the back part by 10 cubits. And he overlaid it with pure gold. He also paneled the altar with cedar. This altar would be the incense altar. Pure gold. The idea of pure gold is, well, I guess the highest quality of gold. And it is laid on the inside, right? Laid on the inside of the sanctuary. The inside is all gold. Verse 21. And then Solomon overlaid the inside of the house, which is this part here, also with pure gold. And he extended chains of gold across the front of the inner sanctuary, and he overlaid it with gold. And so when we talk about chains, we are likely talking about here. And that's gold. Verse 22. He overlaid the entire house with gold until all the house was finished. The entire altar, which was by the inner sanctuary, he overlaid with gold. This altar would be here. That would be the altar. And in the inner sanctuary, he made 2 cherubim of olive wood, each 10 cubits high. The wing of the first cherub was 5 cubits. The other wing was 5. From one end of the wing to the other were 10 cubits. Let's continue reading first. The second cherub was 10 cubits. Both of the cherubim was of the same measurement and the same form. The height was 10, the other the same. Verse 27. He placed the cherubim in the midst, in the inside of the inner house, which is at the back, which is the Holy of Holies. The wings of the cherubim spread out, that the wing of one was touching one wall, and the wing of the other cherub was touching the other wall. And their wings were touching to end in the center of the house. Now, it is quite interesting to see that the wings of the cherubim spread out so that the wing of one was touching one wall, and The wing of the other cherub was touching the other wall, and their wings were touching end to end in the center of the house. Now, that really doesn't tell us exactly how it looks like. But if you were to just read this as literal, being uh, the cherub, and so you would say that this is how I would imagine it to be, right? So this would be my artist impression. The cherub would both be here, one wing this side, and the other wing this side, right? Uh, and it's standing in the side, but the wings are touching each other. So we have wing of one was touching wall, the other wing was touching the other wall, right here, right? And then their wings were touching in the center of the house, like this. So that would be my artist impression. He also overlaid the cherubim with gold. So everything in the inner sanctuary was all gold plated or gold lined. Verse 29. He carved all the surrounding walls of the house with engravings, and these are pictures. These are pictures on the sides of the walls here. Pictures of what? Cherubim, palm trees, open flowers for the inner and outer sanctuaries. Now, what this means is all the way on the inner walls are these pictures for the inner and outer sanctuaries. Remember, this is called the inner sanctuary. This is called the outer sanctuary. Verse 30. Verse 30 says this. He overlaid the floor of the house with gold for the inner and outer sanctuary. Recall, the floorboards are made of cypress, and now it's all gold. So it's gold all over. Gold all over. So what you would probably see is this would be gold on the inside and the walls. Now we go on to our next part of the description. In verse 31, verse 31 is, and for the entrance of the inner sanctuary. This is with regards to the back of the whole house. This description is called the inner part of the house. The inner part of the house would be very much the Holy of Holies. The entrance to the Holy of Holies, there was a door of olive wood. He made doors of olive wood. The lintel and five-sided doorposts. Now, this is important. The King James may be a bit off, but here in the NASB and the Hebrew is very interesting. There is the doors for the inner sanctuary, and the lintel is the upper part of the doorpost, and this is a pentagon. A pentagon doorpost, five-sided. This is a pentagon. So my artist impression would be like this: 3, 4, 5. It is not square, it is not round, but it is in a pentagon formation. This is the doorposts. Verse 32. And so he made 2 doors of olive wood. He carved them with carvings of these pictures and overlaid them with gold. And he overlaid the cherubim and the palm trees with gold. So now we have the doors here, right? There is 2 doors that you go in. Verse 33. 33 now talks about the main entrance. So he made for the entrance to the main room 4-sided doorposts of olive wood and 2 doors of cypress wood. The 2 leaves of one door turn on pivots, and the 2 leaves on the other door turn on pivots. So now we have 4-sided doorposts, which would be, I would imagine, square blocks. And this would be in front. And 2 doors with leaves that will turn, right? And then he carved on the doors all these same pictures or same motifs overlaid with gold plated on the carved work on the door. Verse 36. And now he built the inner courtyard with 3 rows of cut stones and a row of cedar beams. Now, when you read statements like this, it doesn't tell you very much. All it does tell you is that there is an inner courtyard. An inner courtyard is a space which is delineated. And how would it delineate the inner courtyard? Perhaps this way. Perhaps this way. So I'm using an artist's impression, my own interpretation, that it is a courtyard, and this would be the inner courtyard, but it has 3 rows of stone, cut stone, and a row of cedar beams. What that may mean is we have this. This would be 3 rows of stones, and then we have a row of cedar beams. This would be the wall on the outside, which is this outer wall, which is the what we call the inner courtyard. And so this would be an artist's impression or my impression of it. Now, with this, we would have completed the picture that is left for us. You do know that there are lots of questions that we may have to ask, like how big were the windows? How thick were the walls? Would the walls be evenly have even thickness? Both the wall of the temple and the wall of the chambers might be different as well. So all these are questions which only the construction workers of the day would know. For us, we only know the idea and the concept and the picture that we can put in our minds that this would be somehow the Solomon's temple that would be built, and it is not a trivial picture. So with the picture, you see the side view. The side view would be my view, all right, which we have the chambers, and then we have the wall of the inner court, and then we have the inner sanctuary, which is 20 cubits, and then it rises up to 30 cubits all the way to the front. So this would be how we think the temple will look like from a side profile. Now, not a whole lot of details, but we have to imagine it. What we are given in more detail in chapter 6 is the insides of the temple. The insides of the temple is something which people on a day-to-day basis will never ever get to see. In fact, the common folk will never get to see the inside of the temple. It would be the priests who would get to go in. And then it would be the high priest who would get to go into the sanctuary, the innermost of the house. And so, one of the reasons why chapter 6 describes so much of the internals is that they are left for people like ourselves to imagine, because we will never be able to get in, and the people of the day would not be able to get in as well. So the only people who know exactly how things are would be the priests. The priest operates there on a daily basis, the Levites in the courtyard and on the outside, and that's dwelling places all around the temple with many rooms, and they are there to guard the temple. And so this would be a likely reason. And so I'm just saying it's likely because I'm really pushing myself to give us some more concrete uh, uh, definitions, but it is not possible, because whatever we are describing is just giving us a glimpse of the inside picture of the temple, not so much on the outside. What I can imagine the outsides to be would still be my artist impressions. With that said, we come to the end of chapter 6 with two more verses. Verse 37 tells us, it is in the fourth year. Fourth year of what? The fourth year of the reign of Solomon. So Solomon's reign. Fourth year. The foundation of the house of the Lord was laid in the month of Ziv, and that would be the second month. This is a repeat of verse 1 because the end of this chapter merely summarizes the period of the construction of the temple. Verse 38, and in the 11th year, in the month of Bul, which is the name then, that is the 8th month, the house was finished with all its parts and in accordance with its plans. And all its parts would be davar. Let me just change the color. It would be davar. And with all its plans was mishpat. In normal terms, mishpat would refer to justice. However, in this case, mishpat would refer to all the decisions of construction. Davar would be all the matters of the house, and all the mishpat, all the decisions that needed to be done of the pattern. And it was 7 years in building. So what we can see is in the fourth year and in the second month, it started all the way to the 11th year and the 8th month. And so all in all is approximately 7+ years. Now, in the way that the Hebrew count, 7 would be a rounding number. It is more than 7, but less than 8. Right? More than 7 and less than 8 is still within the 7-year period. And that's how numbers are used in the everyday understanding. So what we have here is that Solomon and the entire nation was very busy building the temple together with Hiram, the king of Tyre, with all his people. And it took 7 years and 6 months, 7.5 years, around 7 years, right? And that would be how we are reading it. And it is a magnificent construction in accordance to the design of God. God's house, God's design. and it must be done according to how God wants it. Solomon did not contract any architect or any interior designer to sit down and wonder, what should we do with the house of God? And so God's house, God had already given it to David through the prophets, and David communicated it to Solomon. Solomon communicated to the people in charge, and in 7.5 years, the entire work was completed. And with this, we come to the end of our session today. Now the house which King Solomon built for the Lord, its length was 60 cubits, its width 20, and its height 30 cubits. The vestibule in front of the sanctuary of the house was 20 cubits long across the width of the house, and the width of the vestibule extended 10 cubits from the front of the house. Against the wall of the temple, he built chambers all around, against the walls of the temple, all around the sanctuary and the inner sanctuary. Thus, he made side chambers all around it. And he made for the house windows with beveled frames. The lowest chamber was 5 cubits wide, the middle was 6 cubits wide, and the third was 7 cubits wide. For he made narrow ledges around the outside of the temple, so that the support beams would not be fastened into the walls of the temple. The doorway for the middle story was on the right side of the temple. They went up by stairs to the middle story, and from the middle to the third. So he built the temple and finished it, and he paneled the temple with beams and boards of cedar. And he built side chambers against the entire temple, each 5 cubits high. They were attached to the temple with cedar beams. And he built the inside walls of the temple with cedar boards. From the floor of the temple to the ceiling, he paneled the inside with wood. And he covered the floor of the temple with planks of cypress. The inner sanctuary was 20 cubits long, 20 cubits wide, and 20 cubits high. He overlaid it with pure gold and overlaid the altar of cedar. And the floor of the temple he overlaid with gold, both the inner and outer sanctuaries. The whole temple he overlaid with gold until he had finished all the temple. And then he set the cherubim inside the inner room, and they stretched out the wings of the cherubim so that the wing of the one touched one wall, and the wing of the other cherub touched the other wall, and their wings touched each other in the middle of the room. And also he overlaid the cherubim with gold. For the entrance of the inner sanctuary, he made doors of olive wood. The lintel and doorposts were 5-sided. So for the door of the sanctuary, he also made doorposts of olive wood, 4-sided. And he built the inner court with 3 rows of hewn stone and a row of cedar beams. And in the 11th year, in the month of Bul, which is the 8th month, the house was finished in all its details and according to all its plans. So he was 7 years in building it.